Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. My guest today is Dr. Kelly Kapic. Kelly earned his PhD from King's College at University of London. He's a professor of theological studies at Covenant College in Lookout Mountain, Georgia, where he has taught for more than 20 years. He's an award-winning author or editor of more than 15 books, including his book Embodied Hope and his most recent book, Only Human, both of which won the Christianity Today Book of the Year Award in Theology. So, super excited about this conversation. Had a wonderful time talking to Kelly. So, please welcome to the show, the one and only Dr. Kelly Kapic. Kelly, thanks so much for being on Theology in the Raw. I really enjoyed your talk at the last Q Ideas Cultural Summit. And then I think shortly after, your publisher sent me your book, and I was like, oh, sweet. This is such an absolutely needed topic. So anyway, thanks for being on the show. And
thanks for having me.
We can dive into the book. It's called You're Only Human, How Your Limits Reflect God's Design and Why That's Good News, which I'm so glad a theologian is tackling this, because it's one of those things that I feel like a lot of us intuitively are feeling that
for sure.
When I look around, I see so much efficiency, right? I mean, the last just few decades, it's like we are masters of efficiency, and yet we're more overworked than ever, more stressed out, anxiety rates, depression through the roof. So I'm just in the back of my mind, just a practical question, like, is this working? Like, what we're trying to do to make our lives like less stressful, happier, and all these things. I'm like, why is it not working? Anyway, that's kind of where my mind goes. But why don't you begin with telling us what led you to write the book, and maybe give us an elevator pitch of what it's all about?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we can feel it in our souls. So, let me start with your last question in terms of what took me to it. There are some personal and some pastoral and actually some theological ones. The personal is just, like many of your listeners, I'm sure, can relate. So often at the end of days, I have this nagging voice in my head that is accusing me, saying, why didn't you do more? Why, and it brings with it, these waves of guilt and shame. And so, and as a theologian, I'm not against repentance. Repentance is a gift, right? And when I've been cruel, when I've been greedy and unkind and hurtful, I want God to convict me, and I want to be liberated and repent of that. But as a theologian, this thing is not shaken for years. And one of the questions is, well, should I feel guilt over not doing more, right? And if I'm spending 10 hours a day playing video games or whatever, I mean, there is this guilt unto life, right? But I think a lot of us can relate to that. It's like, when have you ever done enough? When have you done enough of your to-dos, right? And so that's part of what's driven me personally, is trying to think through, and even in that, like, how did I spend my day? Which is a sign we have just been driven in our imaginations by this economic model, right? And that we're going to spend it. So there's that personal side, and the other personal thing is my wife in 2008 got cancer, and by God's grace, and this is a longer story, but after a year was declared cancer-free. But since 2010, she's dealt with pretty serious chronic pain and fatigue. And so as two very, driven people, all of a sudden, one thing after another, we just having to trim and trim and trim. And that brings up questions of identity and purpose and what do you do? And so by God's provision, I ended up, and with her encouragement, I wrote a book on pain and suffering called Embodied Hope. But it was only after doing that I finally felt able to start reflecting on the good of being a creature. So that's it. And then the very short theological things driving the book is I really think Christians in the West, and particularly evangelicals, kind of the world I work in, I think we have a very underdeveloped doctrine of creation and an underdeveloped appreciation for the humanity of Jesus. So that's a lot, but those are some of the theological and personal reasons driving the book.
What are some? That's interesting. Can you expand on that and maybe give us some examples of what it looks like when people have an insufficient doctrine of creation and the humanity of Jesus? Like, what are some practical ways in which that plays out?
Yeah. So, since I mentioned, in evangelical worlds, I just think our view of creation is underdeveloped, underutilized, however you want to put it. And people say, what do you mean? We talk about creation all the time. And I say, when we talk about creation historically in the last 150 years, it's all been about when did God create the earth and how did he do it? Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say there's nothing to those questions, but they are certainly theologically not first and foremost. But that has captured our imagination. So this is partly why we struggle to appreciate the goodness of our bodies and how do we relate to the earth. Or even, I have a chapter on the importance of process. God actually, in the creation narrative, one thing you actually, no matter if you think the world is, I don't know, 10,000 years old or 10 billion years old, either vision, what you do get from the narrative is the God who could have made everything in a millisecond actually takes his time. Which mean, and the spirit hovering over the waters, this tohu luvohu, this chaotic water, and starting to bring about order. That means from the beginning, even before there's sin or fall, God likes process. He's very comfortable taking his time. Now, that view of creation is important because as Christians, we get to a view of sanctification in the Christian life. If you don't have a high view of creation, then your only option as a Christian is every day you kind of feel like God's disappointed in you. Like, well, you screwed up today, but you got forgiveness. And you're like, wait, is that the only option? Or is God very comfortable in process? He knows where you are. He knows where he wants to take you. And that's just part of him being the creator and you're a creature. Yeah. So anyways, there's all kinds of things related to that. But
I've thought about the one of the most brilliant titles of any book, I think, was Eugene Peterson's A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. I've never actually read it. But I just
like a great book.
I bet it is because I get kind of like I've read several books by Peterson and I get his kind of I can almost predict what the book's gonna
the title's so good you don't need to read the book.
I should probably read it. There's several Peterson books. I'm like, I can't believe I haven't read that one. But just that idea of in our, and I don't know what I'm sure we'll go here, but in our pre-internet age or just things just took longer. They were more thoughtful. We didn't rush things so much. And I most of my life has been in the internet age, but I mean, I do remember back then, and things were just, I don't know, just the slower movingness of things did seem to, I don't know, produce, I don't want to say better results because there I go back into the kind of production thing, but just, I don't know, more thoughtfulness, more humanness. I don't know. I can't even put it in words really, but it just felt more just different.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think in some ways what we have to wrestle through here is our imaginations, because our imaginations, which at one point were kind of shaped by, say, horses, an elderly neighbor, these kind of things. Now they're shaped by a smartphone, a car, the cloud. One is so about efficiency, speed, and expansion, right? Whereas the other is just by necessity. There's process, there's slowness. And so I do think there's a different, we watch Westerns or whatever you see, and you're like, oh, look at the person ride the horse. But even in most of those movies, if they're any good, they got to get off the horse. They got to rest the horse. But now our imagination is shaped by the smartphone. You plug it in for 20 minutes, it should be ready to go for hours again. And that's kind of how we view life. Like even in Christian circles, much less non-Christian circles, like if you say you really need 8 hours of sleep, it's like you're weak. Right. Yeah. And that's starting to change, but it's been a big thing. And so, one audience for this book that's been huge is pastors. And I get a lot of notes and letters from people who they've been dying. Yeah. And, one of them, recently said, in college, there was a small group of us and we said, how can we just sleep on 4 hours a night? So we have 20 hours for Jesus. Right. Yeah. Well, that sounds like great, and that'll sell a book. It's like, don't waste your life or something. But you got to think through, what does it mean to be human, and what does God actually want? What does faithfulness look like? So the pastoral burnout. I mean, COVID didn't help either. Do you think? Do you think it is a production performance drivenness that my identity is found in how much I produce, how much I grow? I mean, as a church board, even I know a lot of churches that don't say they're church growth oriented, and yet, when the church doubles in size, they're not like saying,
Who cares? They're excited, because we
Yeah.
doubled, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but we're not church
Yeah,
growth,
yeah.
but like we
Yeah.
got like 1,000 people this week. So, or Easter, how many people attend on Easter, and
Yeah.
sometimes these measurements can be just intuitively, production kind of oriented. Would you say? I'm kind of just
for
thinking out
sure.
loud. Yeah.
Sure. And the pastors in the congregation, I don't want to make anyone the bad person here.
Sure.
None of them, like you said, none of them are going to say we hate evangelism or we don't want to grow or anything like that. And yet they're saying we're not making it the main thing. But I think the test of this in my own soul and in others is, how do you view prayer?
Huh.
Because even though we all know we should pray, and most of us say, oh, I know I should pray more. The reality is we don't pray because we don't think it's doing anything. It's a waste of time.
Totally.
It is inefficient. And pastors of all, they know, and you can sense this, like, is prayer that, and I'm not trying to guilt trip any pastors or anyone else.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is life with the living God, and you especially who are feeding sheep, you have to be with him, right? But those things are inefficient. At pastoral ministry, it's funny when business people, and I do think this contributes to pastoral ministry, you'll get business people like, listen, I know the church is having trouble. I know you're struggling. Let me come in and advise you. And they'll come in and they'll organize them and, say all this, which is great on paper. And then Tuesday morning, the pastor gets a call and there's a kid in the hospital who overdosed on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Tuesday night, there's, he finds out this couple that's been in the church for 10 years is divorcing. And all of this blows up your calendar because it's inefficient. It's relational, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you want growth, if you want productivity, relationships get downplayed.
Oh, yeah. I've noticed in my own schedule, so this, I don't know, I feel like we're off to 10 minutes now. And this is going to be probably a pretty personal podcast for me because everything you're saying, sure. I deeply wrestle with. In my most honest moments, I don't pray nearly as much as I should because if I'm honest, I'm like, well, I didn't pray yesterday. Got a lot done. Things seem fine.
Yeah.
2 days before that, I prayed 5 minutes and same thing. I just been, when I'm so focused on life in front of me or just the material realm, if you will, or production, I'm like, I'm producing pretty well without prayer. And I want to throw up in my face just saying that because I'm like, what, am I even a Christian? But like, I'm just, that reality is just front and center with me. And as much as I deeply value that kind of slow moving, marinating in life, and there's quality of the things that take time, a meal that takes 2 hours to cook or 4 hours to cook is going to be a better meal, taking time to produce something, a book or something, is typically going to be a higher quality. And yet I just battle so much. I don't know. Every time I turn around, every month, I'm like, okay, how did my schedule get so jam packed? It's like, I'm looking at myself saying, well, because of me, really, but like, to your point, when I jam pack my schedule, unexpected people become an interruption, and that is just so wrong on so many levels. What's wrong with me? I'm gonna owe you a therapist bill after this podcast. But
honestly, I appreciate you sharing that. And we, a lot of us can relate to that, and that's part of me. Part of what's driving the book is me working through this stuff myself, right? I'm not writing as an expert, but as a fellow pilgrim, and some of the uncomfortable things I've seen in myself. And I turned 50 this year, and I feel like I've just been in recent years learning how to pray, right? Learning how to, and listen, you and I both, because of things we do, life can be incredibly busy, right? And you have to say yes to things and no to things. And it's not bad to be busy and even stressed at times. Stress, and we can talk about stress if you want a little later. And I talk about that in the book. Stress is not a bad thing. Stress is a gift from God. Like when you hear the roar of a lion, stress can move in your body. There can actually be, an adrenaline move, and you can actually respond in super powerful ways. The problem is what we've taken is the gift of stress, the gift of even times of busyness. We've made them into a lifestyle. And so what is a good gift is a terrible master. And what's happened is all of us, because of the the imagery of efficiency and productivity feel like every moment should be producing something. And so it's not bad. Work is a good thing. It's just when it becomes the main thing. And that is the metaphor of our lives now. So trying to rethink that. And what I'm interested in is kind of biblically, theologically, is that God's vision, right? Let's take this really fundamental. What does the flourishing life look like? And I'm not trying to present some romantic view where we're just, hanging out, drinking pina coladas all the time and never doing anything. It's not that. I'm just asking, what does it mean to be really human? And to be more humane in an inhumane world.
Now, so here's a question. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that there are times, there's necessary seasons for busyness, or even, and where my mind just went is like different socioeconomic privileges, for lack of better terms. Like, you and I are white collar intellectuals that, might be able to take time to spend the morning contemplating the things of life and slow down. Other people are like, man, if I don't work my 3 jobs, I'm a single mom, whatever, and I don't get enough sleep because I'm just trying to survive. What would you how should we think through that? Just different. I don't know. Yeah.
You want my real answer?
Yeah.
Because it's such a good question, and I think we need to be super aware of it. In my limited experience, the people I know who are Christians, who are in some of those pretty dire socioeconomic settings, both in America and elsewhere, they're wondering why I'm asking that, because they actually spend way more time in prayer and stuff.
Oh, wow.
It's just interesting. Because fundamental, what the thesis of the book is that we confuse finitude and sin. And finitude is just the fancy word for limits in space, time, knowledge, and power, right? Or the Christian word for it is creature. And we feel guilty for being creatures, right? And in a different kind of way to circle around, if I'm talking to someone and I say, and you overhear it, and I say, yeah, I met Preston, great guy, but man, he's really dependent on a lot of other people. Is that ever a positive in our culture, including Christian culture? Like, that is such a negative.
Yeah.
But dependence is fundamental to being a creature and a Christian discipleship. We were made, there's a whole chapter on humility, and I think we've misunderstood humility because we built it on sin rather than creatureliness. Even before sin or the fall, we were made to be humble. And humility is about being dependent on God, dependent on our neighbor, dependent on creation. That's the good of creation. That's not a bad thing. That's not a response to sin. So this becomes really important because dependence is this positive. And people often, believers who don't have a lot of socioeconomic resources, often cultivate a dependence on God, a dependence on others and the earth. And so it doesn't have to look like this long, quiet time, but there is this fostered dependency. And because they often can't be. Anyways, productivity is not the only thing for them.
Yeah. I feel like my wife, little shout out to my wife, she models a good balance. She's incredibly productive. She's one of those people that doesn't need near as much sleep as like I do. Like, she just wakes up.
Yeah, they're just differences among people.
I actually, I met another buddy of mine, new friend of mine, who's a pastor, and he says, I think 4 or 5 hours of sleep or something, but it's not because of why most pastors might limit themselves to 4 or 5. He did a lot of research and said there are some people with almost like a genetic disorder or something, that. So my wife, I think my wife might have that actually, because she can function on so little, and she doesn't force herself to get little. It just happens. But she has a rhythm of dependence on God while she's being productive in a way that I'm like, oh, that's a great combination. Because some people, they're dependent upon God, but they might also, I don't know. Some people, it might be a streak of laziness where it's like, today I'm just not going to work. I'm going to meditate on a mountainside all day, which sounds great, and maybe it is. I don't know, but
and I'm not, this idea of being a creature is not about not working.
Yeah.
And it's not a utopian vision. It's what does it mean to be human with rhythms of rest and work? And even like you were asking earlier, and different times when your imagination is informed, say, by the seasons of crops. Listen, those guys, there are times when farmers historically and even to this day, I mean, you put in a lot of hours. You might be putting in 15-hour days or whatever it is. You're going all the time. You've got to do that. And you can do that for a season. The problem is we now try and make it a lifestyle.
Right.
And it's fascinating, maybe to change it a little bit. So there's this, I don't know if you've read this book, Oliver Burkeman, he writes these, he's kind of he's written a lot in time management.
Okay.
And best-selling books. And his most recent book is called 4,000 Weeks. And that's the average lifespan of someone in the Western world, 4,000 weeks. And he wrote this while he was researching and writing it while COVID was happening. And it's fascinating. And I read it. It came out right after I turned in my manuscript. But it was so great because here's this guy, best-selling book on time management. And he has this aha experience writing this book. And he realizes, oh, my word, all of us in time management, we're trying to deny our mortality.
Oh, wow.
That's the whole point of time management. And from what he's very thoughtful, he's clearly reads, Augustine and other Christian authors, but I don't know if he's a person of faith. But it's super interesting, right? And he actually ends up just saying there is an irrationality to what we're all doing here, right? And so I'm a college professor, and I've been talking about this stuff for a while. And so I like you, I love to ask people questions, and I want to learn from them. And a couple of years ago, one of my students, she came, said, let's have lunch. So we had lunch, and we sit down, and she takes this piece of paper and slides it across to me. And it's color-coded, 7-day, every hour is on that page, color-coded every hour. And she says, on this is everything you and other people, professors, pastors, parents, you guys all say I should do, right? So it's like, you say you should have 8 hours of sleep, that matters, right? She blocks it off. You say I should read my Bible a little bit and I should pray, blocks it off. You say I should have 3 meals a day and not just shove it in my mouth, but actually talk to people. You say I should go to class 18 hours a day, every hour in class, do this much out. You see where it's going, right?
Oh, I
and
know.
I should go to, and here's the, we laugh about it, and it's literally impossible for her to do everything that she's quote unquote supposed to do. Well, I think most of us could do that in our lives. If you actually take the time and go, what are all the things I should do? I should do exercise. I should be investing in my church, and I should do this for work. And you go down the list, and that's part of how I start the book is I realized that it's impossible. Like at best, I'm just getting through, right? I constantly feel like I'm letting people down. But part of it is this unrealistic view of what it means to be human and how much we should get done. And so part of my frustration is, as a church, our answer to this dilemma has been the same as non-Christians. It's time management. We give people time management theories. And I want to reintroduce us to what it means to be human, right? So trying to come to terms with your limits without apologizing.
So I was a college professor for a number of years, and I didn't think about this until you brought it up, but that was a common complaint among students is exactly that. And students can be
so unrealistic as faculty. Yeah.
Well, so what I know that's more of an illustration, but I'm curious. That's a great concrete thing to think through. Like many people have various pressures in life that if they did everything that they're supposed to do, just quantity wise, the numbers don't match up. I mean, if every professor was a moderate to somewhat difficult professor, and you're taking your even 12, let alone 15 credit hours, and doing your work study and having meals and doing your spiritual formation stuff and going to chapel and 8 hours of, like, it just, the numbers don't match up. So do you think
No, they don't.
Do you think schools we should say it's a 7-year program instead of 4 or something with the same amount of credit? I mean, like, it's
worse than this, Preston. It's worse. So I think we not just in Christian circles at large, we are catechizing way before college. Okay. So the average high school kid, and I didn't plan on this research, it just ended up taking me there. Here's and a lot of your listeners can tell you if this is true or not. And this is middle and upper middle class public and private school. Yeah. It is a little different when it's not that.
Sure.
But this is happening all over the country and has now for decades. The average day starts, the kids leave in high school 7:30 in the morning. They're in class till about 3:30. Then they go and change and go do an extracurricular. It could be robotics, it could be a sport, it could be theater, whatever. They do that till about 6:30. They rush home, take a shower, slam down some food, and then normally do some other extracurricular activity and study until about 11:30 at night every day. And I'm not naive. I know that they're watching YouTube videos and TikTok in there and all that. But that's what's happening every day. So they're being catechized by this. And then college continues this. And so it's interesting because when I start to talk about this, people often are like, yeah, but what about the TikToks or what about Netflix binging? And I used to want to blame that stuff too. But actually now, rather than blaming those things, I'm more interested in not just the kids, why do you and I want to binge on Netflix and do all that? And I think it's because it's the only way to escape the endless onslaught of to-dos.
Yes.
Which is why we can watch Netflix for 3 or 4 hours, but think about how you feel as soon as it's done. Mm-hmm. You feel guilty. I just wasted time. So, but it's the escape, right? We don't want to have any moments where we're not distracted because we know we should be doing something. So the phone, rather than being the thing to blame, I think is just kind of an accepted drug to help us in this situation.
It's an escape from the rat race so there's a cause and effect here. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I do think, say it's a college, say it's a work, and we need to reimagine what faithfulness looks like. And people bring me in to speak and stuff, and they love what I'm saying about finitude, and yes, I don't want to feel guilty. But then it almost always reaches the point where they're like, yes, you're 100% right. Now, how do I do everything I need to do and that?
Mm-hmm.
And the painful answer, is with a student, for example, maybe the answer is you get some B's. We don't want to hear that, right? But maybe the answer is you can't work and go to school. Maybe the answer is, but we don't want to make choices. Yeah. And the lack of making choices is part of what's undermining our humanity.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say it's all this, but as you probably know, there's a massive mental health crisis happening.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
All over, but especially in young people. And part of it is they do this for a while and then they're like, I'm done. I'm out. Right. This is not working.
Right.
So this is huge.
And whatever the cause and effect, I mean, what the latest statistics are, they might spend 6 to 7 hours a day on screens. Now, people don't understand teenagers. I have 4 teenagers, and they're able to well, they think they're multitasking, but as who's Andrew Huberman or who's the deep work guy? Cal Newport, says the brain doesn't actually multitask.
No, it just moves between tasks.
It moves between, So
yes, that's what happens.
But so you add, again, pre-internet. Well, we still had TV and stuff. So we're watching. I don't know, but it's what's the solution? Yeah, so I'm curious. What is the solution? Because you're describing such systemic problems that I don't know if we're going to revamp the 4-year college degree anytime soon, or tell professors assign less, or even when I was a professor, I just said this to my daughter the other day. She was first year in college and she's writing a paper. It's like a 5-page research paper on, I think, the Sherpas or something. And I said, and she, I'm like, okay, here's how you do research and stuff. But I told her, make sure you don't just grab stuff really quickly and throw together, like actually like marinate in the sources, like learn, like make learning the topic the goal, not just producing a paper. But then that takes a lot longer than just cranking out a paper that you can get a B- on. But again, are our systems set up, both in the church and in the academy, to help students foster, taking research slow and do a few drafts, get some feedback, maybe, meet with your professor, say, hey, would you mind reading this ahead of time? And he's not going to have time to do that, but that would be ideal, right? That would be actually people would be truly learning rather than just cranking out stuff to get through a course.
Yeah, often at Covenant now where I teach, if you are going to assign a research paper, normally you have to do it in a way that the student will have opportunity to receive feedback from you and revise it.
Good. Okay.
Because all the data is, if you only turn it in at the end, it doesn't, they don't get better. And it's you undermine this very process you're talking about. So, I'm not naive on this, but I think the fact that I am interested in helping us reclaim our humanity.
Hmm.
And students deal with so much guilt and shame, and most of us do in our lives, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, just to use to change examples, because I just have dealt with this recently, where a young couple married, they're doing great, they're excelling at work, and they have a baby. They're very happy about having a baby. But then there's this shocker that's super disillusioning, because they all of a sudden deal with deep sense of shame because they're not getting very much done anymore. They're not getting very much sleep. Everything's becoming inefficient. It just slows way down. And if you don't have a theology that says, no, it's okay, this season is different, you can't just have everything that you had plus.
You're
right? At some point, something has to be taken away. That's what it looks like. And then when you're an empty nester, that looks different too, right? Anyway, so this I guess even with the creation narrative, part of what's fascinating to me is, since God could have made it in a second and doesn't, it's one of those signs for God. He loves efficiency and productivity. They're just not his highest values.
Mm-hmm.
Love is.
Yeah.
Love is. And I think the big test case for us is, how do relationships fit in to our lives?
Mm-hmm.
How do we think about love? And love tends to require margin. And again, this is not about being wealthy and having margin. I find it super interesting. So many middle and upper middle class folks, we just think we have no time. But when you are financially struggling, it's interesting. It's totally normal to help someone jump their battery, get gas for a car, because in your neighborhood, everybody's just getting by. Statistically, some of the most generous people are people on the lower income level, because giving is just part of life.
Mm-hmm.
But those of us, when you get more prosperous, the illusion of control and self-containment grows. And so anything is a problem that distracts you from your goals.
Yeah.
But actually, if you don't have a lot materially, you're pretty used to helping others and getting help from others.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it so helps when you do go to other cultures. And I don't, I think other cultures definitely struggle with similar things, if not the same things. But then other ones, my favorite, probably my favorite culture is Polynesian cultures. I went to Samoa a couple times during college on like a short term but longer short-term trip. I've been to Tahiti and other places, and just the cool thing about Polynesian cultures is it's so close. Most of them are so close to the equator that you don't have a lot of shift in daylight. Like it's kind of sun up at 6 a.m., sundown at 6 p.m. with minimal variation, and that really controls the work, kind of the work day. Like people, once the sun comes up, people are kind of busy going out doing stuff. Once it goes down, they're having meals, or Tahiti, they're out drinking in the lagoon, partying or whatever. But I mean, I don't know. It just created this like really honest creational rhythm of the day that had built in kind of like things are shutting down, and people were kind of chilling, hanging out. And I love. I remember the first time I was in Samoa, I came back and I was like, I think every American needs to spend a summer in Samoa. Like, just things are just slower moving, and I don't know, people just seem so much happier. Somebody's on the side of the road broken down, and like you would have everybody would stop and like, hey, can I help you out?
You just think about it.
Yeah.
So I love that you mentioned that, because I'd like to take a second on it, because another area of research I didn't plan on was I ended up doing all this research and thinking through the invention of clocks. And you have ancient clocks and sundials and all of that. So, and I won't bore people with it right now, but it's actually super interesting, because what's happened now, it is about our relationship to time, and time now in our minds is about productivity. And so scholars in this field make a distinction. This is going to get to your illustration. They talk about the difference between contextual and non-contextual views of time. And most of us in the Western world now actually have non-contextual views of time, because you and I, if it's 11 o'clock at night, we can go in, and this is not just about clocks, this is about electricity and all this kind of stuff. So at 11 o'clock at night, we go into the kitchen, we turn on the light, we open our laptop, right? And you and I have an hour of work to do, and we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because we're treating every hour as if it's contextual time, which is how most people in the history of the world and a lot of the world to this day lives, is it's in light of the context. So when the sun is up, it's one thing. When the sun is down, it's another thing. When your body, we deny our body chemistry of blood sugar levels. Is there a baby crying in the background? And that's because we're trying to pretend it's all the same. Contextual time recognizes, no, someone's sick. This is a different time. So the fact that we, even sunrise and sunset, have lost any significance for us is really interesting. And so even just a funny example for me is, a lot of your listeners have heard you hear these examples of saints through the ages, and they're like, they got up at 4:30 in the morning to pray, or 3 in the morning. And that's great. Sometimes it was really amazing, but sometimes it was because they went to bed at 8. It was dark. And there were times when actually we have this history where they'd go to bed for about 4 hours and wake up for an hour or two and then sleep for a little bit, just different patterns, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't know any of that, and you just take our lifestyle, where weekend with electricity, we work until 11:30 at night or whatever, and then you're like, well, I should get up at 4 to pray.
Yeah.
You're not understanding. This is a different world.
This episode is sponsored by Biola University's Talbot School of Theology. Okay, so I get asked a lot about which seminaries do I recommend, and my response is always the same. It kind of depends on what you're looking for. But no matter what, Talbot is always one of my top recommended schools, partly because I feel like I know like half the professors there, so I can vouch for, who they are, and I know their character. I know what you're going to get into. But I've also spoken on campus, which had amazing time on the campus there. I've had several of the profs on the podcast. Here's what I love most about Talbot. They do a fantastic job combining rigorous scholarship that's saturated with a deep love for the church, and it's all integrated with a pervasive emphasis on spiritual formation in the lives and hearts of the students. The professors are super down to earth. They're involved in their churches. Many of them are pastors at their church, and they also write high-powered academic books. So if you're looking to deepen your understanding of Scripture, or just be more equipped to serve your family, your church, the world around you, Talbot offers many different courses and degree programs. And they also have done a really fantastic job with their online program, where you can attend live online or watch pre-recorded courses by some amazing professors. So if you've been thinking about going to seminary, check out biola.edu/Talbot. That's TALBOT. Biola.edu/Talbot to get more information. I went through, because I'm not a morning person at all. My ideal, maybe wake up at 6:30. Today was 6:30, but it's always very slow moving. And I can't really fall. I mean, it's hard for me to fall, even if I'm tired, to fall asleep kind of before 10, if not 11:30. So, I'm not a morning person at all, but I used to, I don't do it anymore. But I used to live with all this, guilt for not getting up super early.
Yeah, right.
It's something about, Jesus did it. Can't you, he rose from the dead. You can't even get out of bed. Like,
I
think it was a line from,
you're just dating yourself right there. That's great.
Luckily I don't struggle with guilt. Going back to my therapy session here. I used to feel guilty for saying no, for not doing this, for not living this kind of Christian life, that kind of Christian life. And I really don't. I genuinely don't struggle with that anymore. I've come to celebrate the diversity of God's people, how they're wired, the gifts that they have, the gifts they don't have, the callings they have. I'd feel guilty for how come you didn't buy a one-way ticket to an unreached people group?
Right.
What, you don't think that's a greater need than staying in America or something? And I lived with that for years, or how come we're not doing more evangelism, or doing this, doing that? And I'm like, I have a kind of a lane and a calling I feel like I'm in. And I feel like I'm, doing that as good as I can, or, as faithfully as I can. and not be so like, because if you just start succumbing to that guilt, you can be crippling. And because I've experienced that before, just feeling like you're around all these other people who are doing so many different things. Well, I need to do all that. I need to get up at 4 a.m. One of my buddies is like my wife. 4 a.m. He springs out of bed. He's like, yeah, you just gotta kind of just do it for a week, wake up, and your body will adjust, whatever. I tried it, and I was like throwing up in the afternoon. I was so tired, and I just I'm just not wired that way, dude.
And I think honestly, part of what also feeds this, maybe in a surprising way, is our overly individualistic framework of viewing the Christian life and just life itself. So take, for example, Matthew 25, I think is a good example. So in Matthew 25, it includes the whole sheep and the goats episode, right? And Jesus says it's in red letters. We can't ignore it, right? And sheep go to heaven, goats go to hell. It's this very sobering thing. And when you read it, it actually, everyone wants to bring in other things. But when you actually just read the text, the thing that separates the sheep and the goats is, how did you treat the least of these? Did you clothe the naked? Did you feed the hungry? Did you visit the prisoners? Those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And I find it fascinating because right now, part of our polarization is even reflected in how we deal with a passage like that, where when some people read that, they rightly feel convicted and feel like, I'm not doing any of those things. I really need to do them. And then others read it and go like, nah, that's social gospel stuff. That's, I don't care if it's red. It's not my Bible. So kind of ignore it. And, I had a friend of mine who's in ministry who's super faithful and all of this, but he called me, single guy, very faithful. And he just said, Kelly, I can't shake Matthew 25 because I don't know if I'm a goat. I don't visit prisoners. And he's like, I don't have very much money. Maybe I can get a few more hours in the week to visit, to work at the food shelter or whatever. So what do you do, right?
Yeah.
And I think honestly, we hear something like that, we think, oh, he just has an overly tender conscience and he just needs to be. And I think, well, or that may be true, but also maybe he's just taking Jesus more seriously than us, because it does. So, anyways, without taking too long, I would just say the way I answered Matt. The way I answered this guy is the way I think through this is, when I think about my last week, I was in Nepal evangelizing, and I was praying with children in the hospital who were on the verge of death. And I was helping recovering sex trafficked folks. And I was helping fight racial injustice. And you're like, how did you do that last week? It's because I'm part of the body of Christ. And by the Spirit, I'm not just united to Christ, but I'm united to all these other people who are doing those things.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
And so the argument I would make is, which is when you say I don't feel guilty, here's, I think, the theological reason you shouldn't feel guilty is because it takes the entire church to be the one body of Christ. It can't be that Matthew 25 is irrelevant. Right. It has to be, we got to do those things. But for Jesus to say these are really important doesn't mean that each individual must personally do them, but we as the people of God absolutely must do them.
Does it take some
level? Does that
make any
sense?
Yeah. Does it take some level of connection to people doing those things? I'm thinking of like, you mentioned Nepal. I've been to Nepal a few times and have, churches there that we've been involved with and pastors and stuff, or even organizations in Africa and that are literally doing exactly those things.
Yeah.
And if whether it's, financial support or some kind of camaraderie prayer, does there need to be some kind of tangible connection, or is it simply by existing as a Christian that you're part of the global church? You know what I mean?
I would want to, well, actually, I just want to say it's my connection by the Spirit.
Okay.
Right? The Holy Spirit. And that I'm thankful that union with Christ is being rediscovered by people, that we're united to Christ. That is our security. But part of our union with Christ is union to his people. So I do think the more you appreciate that, it should also then foster those connections, so that when the missionaries or whatever say, I'm sorry to ask for money, you're like, no. We as a church are so thankful in this small way we get to participate in what you're doing tangibly. But I don't even want to say that you have to know about it. There are things that God is super passionate about that he thinks are really important that I don't even know about.
Right. Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
okay,
Huh.
right? I
Yeah.
don't need to know about them. The fact that I don't know about them doesn't mean that they're not important to God.
Yeah. Totally.
And that in some kind of mystical way by the Spirit, I still benefit as part of the body of Christ.
Hmm.
So there is something to that larger connection, I think, that's worth exploring.
What are some, Kelly, some practical ways in your own life that you integrate all this stuff that you've been thinking through and learning about? Are there any like major, since writing this book or in the process of writing it,
Yeah.
are there changes you've made, like concrete changes that you can talk about? Or
Yeah, no, that would be a long answer, but it's a great question. So I'll just give you a few things. Because it is me kind of working through these things, both in the process, and I've written and edited a lot, but this book I've probably been wrestling with for 20 years, to be honest. So, and I don't just say that. That's not hyperbolic. But yeah. So I'll give you one concrete example. I think the life, the humane life that I'm talking about, a way to cultivate this is by learning to express lament and gratitude. Lament and gratitude, because lament, part of the reason why we lament, like the Psalms, is we're frustrated. We're like, God, where were you? Why is this happening? But that, surprisingly, is an expression of your creatureliness. You're not in control. You're looking to the Creator who is. And the flip side of that coin is gratitude, right? That to recognize God is working all over the place. The question is, do we recognize it? Do we acknowledge it? And so I do work with the Templeton Foundation with various groups, and one of them, a guy named Robert Emmons, who recently retired from UC Davis, but he's he's a Christian psychologist and was part of the positive psych movement, which is good, and potentially there's some challenges there, but he helped lead all these gratitude studies, and there's all kinds of fascinating work on this. But if you have someone and so here's a practical thing. If you have someone just write a gratitude journal every day for a month, and by that I mean just take 5 minutes and write down 5 things that you're grateful for your day. And that could be a crunchy apple, someone at the grocery store said something nice to you, whatever it was. You can find, and as a theologian, this stuff makes me nervous, but it's still fascinating. You can find, if people do that for a month, there's physiological changes that happen. They actually tend to sleep a little bit better. Heart rate goes down. There's all these kind of things you can measure. So, well, that's part of how God made us. So anyways, one practice is to cultivate both lament and gratitude. It's a way of doing that. And then rest. I ended up actually, because I do wrestle with sleep, there is a section on a theology of sleep and trying to think through sleep. God, the reason we can sleep is God doesn't. And it's kind of like when you're out in battle, you can't fall asleep because someone will shoot you. And part of the Christian promise is you can sleep because we have someone who's watching out for us even when we don't sleep. And so anyways, there's a lot to be said on that, but the last chapter has a bunch of practices of trying to be really practical about this stuff.
Well, what about Sabbath? What's that? Do you have like a specific strict Sabbath or informal Sabbath or Sabbath rhythms?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That is kind of where the book ends. And it's funny, I grew up Catholic, and then was in a Baptist church for a while because I hadn't been in church, and now I'm Presbyterian. It's a longer story than that. But all that to say, in certain Presbyterian circles, you talk about Sabbath and everyone wants to fight, right? What can you do? What can you not do? And if you grew up in some of that, you hear the word Sabbath, people just worry about legalism. But when I'm in circles where people haven't experienced that, and I just say, listen, read your Bible. What if God actually made you to work for 6 days and then actually have a day off? A day where you sleep, you get up, you worship with God's people, you feast with God's people, you gather, you enjoy God's creation, you do not do your normal work. What is it? And they're like, nah, that can't be. And here's the sign: is students feel guilty in college if they don't study on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about Christian students. And so, I am not interested in being legalistic.
Yeah.
But that is this model of like, you need to be using all your time productively. And I think it's hurting us. We desperately need rest. And if you never shut off, the consequences are pretty huge.
And Sabbath, I haven't done a lot of thinking about it. I feel like
Mm.
not even for theological reasons, maybe for practical reasons. My wife and I been married 21 plus years. We've always had, really, I mean, more than a Sabbath, like the weekend. Typically, we don't,
Mm.
whatever we do
Yeah.
Monday through Friday, but we may work, really long hours, and between my,
Yeah, sure.
I might travel a lot. So I'm, literally, I just got home a couple of days ago from it was a 7-day trip in 4 states, speaking, I don't know, 12 times or something. So it's like, what was that, a work week or a
Yeah,
work
that's a
month
lot.
crammed into 7 days?
Right. Right.
So the schedule is just kind of weird to have us, like, I'm not living in an agrarian context where it's just like
Right.
where it's just so
Right.
set, but to have, typically the weekends where we don't, whatever we're doing Monday through Friday, we're not typically not doing on the weekend. But for
Yeah.
me, because like you, my job is to sit down in a chair and stare into a computer or think or write. For me, Sabbath is like going on a long run, working out,
Absolutely.
chopping
Yeah.
wood, or doing something physical. So
Yeah.
I might be working.
Yeah.
I'm in air quotes here.
Yeah.
Physically exhausting myself on a Sunday, but to me that is actually rest for me, because unlike my agrarian brothers and sisters, my work week is the opposite, where they might spend Sunday reading. I'm
100%.
like, I should probably not read on Sunday because I've been literally reading all week, but
yeah, I think that is a difference. I think that, you and I, if you own a landscape business or you do that kind of thing, the odds are you probably shouldn't be doing that in your yard on Sunday for you, and it's not enjoyable. It's not. But for you and I, working in our yard, like trimming bushes, hanging outside, just enjoying God's creation, going for walks and runs, that is just fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if your life is an ultra marathon or something, and that's how you make your income. Maybe Sunday is a day you don't run, but for a lot of us, Sunday's a great day to go for a run, right?
Yeah.
And so again, I'm like so not interested in any kind of legalism here. I'm just interested in pointing us to a very basic idea of how the Creator made His creation in us.
Yeah.
And it's okay to rest. We need to not apologize. And central to that rest is not just rest from work, but resting in God, which is why corporate worship becomes important to that. It's not just labor, not labor. But yeah, there are rhythms even for our days, though. And then the Sabbath is this reset. A Sabbath is to say, the Lord's Day is to say, listen, amazing, I'm not the creator and sustainer. The world continues even when I'm not working. And I do think more and more in our culture, this is the way Christians need to be countercultural, not in a legalistic way, but to remind ourselves and others, things don't fall apart if I'm not working 24/7. And if they do fall apart, then something's wrong, right?
Yeah.
That's not a good thing. So
I'm curious. This might open up a huge can when we might not have time to explore it all. But I'm curious, as we look, like we kind of talked about the challenges over the last several decades with having a better rhythm of flourishing in God's creation. What does the future look like? Because things aren't slowing down at all. And I just, now I've been, keep kind of tapping into some of these questions about, AI. It's just, there's some advancements going on there, almost behind the scenes, and it's starting to hit society. It's like this is possible, like internet level changes that could be happening. And then transhumanism is something I barely even know what that even means. But like, where, as you look ahead, what are some things Christians should maybe anticipate so that we can be maybe more prepared to think theologically ahead of time, rather than just reacting once we're already addicted to the latest thing that might come out?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And as I'm sure you would say this yourself, it's always the challenge that technological advances tend to go quicker than our ethical reflections, right?
Yes.
So without going down all those rabbit trails, I'm personally interested. I'm actually toying with the idea of this book, and your listeners can tell you if you should tell me if it's worth it. But I'm interested in maybe writing a book called "Go Therefore and Make Humans," because when you ask, what do I think about the future? I think Christian discipleship in the future is about helping people reconnect with what it means to be truly human, which is surprisingly becoming more and more difficult. And all the technological things you just mentioned are going to make it worse, not better, in terms of our humanity. And so And people are like, no, it's discipleship. It's not human. Well, no, the creator is the redeemer. They're not different gods. And the goal of the Christian life is not to make you superhuman. It's just to make you truly human. That's all we're doing. And to be truly human is to be in communion with God, neighbor, and the earth. That's what we're made for. That's where God's taken us. That's a beautiful, glorious thing. It's not something else. And that vision is getting more and more difficult. And I do think in the ancient church, in the 2nd century, part of what was happening is they were presenting a vision of being human. Women were dehumanized, children are dehumanized, all these kind of ones. And the church said, no, you have dignity. This is what it looks like to live with God, to be treated as your neighbor and all that kind of thing. So anyways, in light of all those things, I think the church, for me, one of the greatest apologetic moves we can make in the future is actually showing people what being truly human looks like.
What? So can you?
And it looks like love.
Yeah. Have you looked into some of the challenges to that? Like, again, with transhumanism, AI, or what are some really big picture things that are happening that we should be aware of? Or is that not, would you say that's not really your?
Yeah, I mean, I could say some things, but I don't think I'm the most qualified. You could get someone else to talk about those specifics that I think would be able to speak into them more. But I would say that generally it is fascinating that for every technological advance, most of them that we say are going to help us get more done, be more productive, and all this kind of thing, whether it's a vacuum, whether it's a washing machine, we know experientially and historically, all of those advances, all that happens is our expectations change. So that what cleanliness used to look like before the vacuum cleaner, now all that happened is now we expect more cleanliness, not less. This is why, whether it's a smartphone, all these efficiencies. So everything at first that it does save, quote unquote, save you time, ends up making a greater demand upon you. And so all of the things that get promised in whether it's forms of transhumanism, this or that, as Christians, we just need to ask, in what way does this help humanity? In what ways does it dehumanize us? And again, technology is a great gift, right? I'm not against, heart transplants are amazing. It's just, we just have to think through these things and be careful about them. But for my particular purposes, the transhumanism, I will say this, the transhumanism and a lot of that other stuff, it is the promise of making you better than human. Okay. And the whole point of finitude is you're a creature. You're never not going to be a creature. And being a creature is a good thing. It's a beautiful thing. The incarnation is about the eternal Son of God becoming a creature unapologetically. And that's not sinful.
So at its root, the whole transhumanism push or movement or whatever we want to call it is not satisfied with creaturely limitations. It's trying to expand those limitations.
That's the whole
like
goal,
at the very root.
Them.
So it really is a dehumanization.
Yeah,
and maybe that's too strong. I would say it's trying to enhance humanity, maybe, but
yeah, it's a superhuman. That's the goal, right? It's the bionic man, right? Or to age ourselves. But it is the goal of making us stronger, faster, etc. And at what point are we're not who we are? And we don't have time to get into this, but part of the book is exploring we talk about the universal and what does it mean to be human, but we need to talk about the particular too, right? And so in the book, one of the things I explore is I actually think it's if I say, hey, Preston, do you think God loves us? We all say yes. Does God love you? Say yes. But then when you ask, and this is related to this conversation, when you ask, do you think God likes you?
Yeah.
That feels very different. And the reason that relates is it's kind of like I deal with this with students all the time. If I ask them when they're dealing with stuff and they're in my office, I say, you think your parents love you? They always say yes. But if I say, do you think your parents like you? It's amazing how often tears come.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's exactly what we do with God. That is related to the transhumanism conversation. Like, how comfortable is God with you? And God's whole vision for you is not that God hates you. He hates the sin that's distorting the good creature he made. He loves you enough to want to disentangle you from the sin that is distorting and disordering you.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't hate you, and he doesn't need you to be anything other than this particular creature that he made.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyways, that's a different vision of life, though.
Yeah. I've got a buddy, Brad Sarian. He's a pastor in California. And years ago, I think one of the first sermons I've heard him preach, he must have been like in his early 20s or something. Maybe, yeah. And he said that exact phrase. I'll never forget. This is probably at least 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And he said, God loves you. And everybody's like, yeah. And he's like, but he actually likes you. You know? And the audience, I was like, they were like quiet, like, that seems lesser than, but why do I feel stunned by that, you know?
Yeah. And I think it shows we use the word love. Love just carries duty with it. Like, of course your parents have to love you. They're required.
Yes.
But like carries this idea of delight, pleasure, satisfaction. And so again, it's related to where we started. Mm-hmm. Do we have a doctrine of creation? We all say God created good, but do we actually believe that?
Yeah.
When we so quickly move to sin, do we still think that God likes his creation?
I mean, I think, when we think of creation, I feel like Genesis 1 comes easy at this kind of distant, powerful Elohim deity, powerfully hurling creation into existence. But in Genesis 2, now we have Yahweh, this personal God, the image of him literally playing in the dirt and getting his hands in the soil and forming Adam and coming face to face and breathing life into Adam's nostrils. I mean, it's such an intimate. I just love those twin ideas of this holy other, God in Genesis 1 and
transcendent and immanent.
Yeah. Oh man. And it's crazy. It's understandable that a lot of theologians like, these have to be two different authors, I get that because they seem so different, and yet to know that those two ideas of transcendence and intimacy are both equally part of the heart of God is pretty profound. So, but I think I read Genesis 1, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Get that, Genesis 2, I'm like,
and
wow, yeah, that's hard.
And part of the connection, there's a chapter. The title was going to be, and now it's just a subtitle, but it's Praise God for Mary. And I'm a Protestant, but we lose the significance of Mary. You have to connect Genesis 1 and John 1. And what is actually going on there is really beautiful. It is God. The incarnation is God's yes to his creation. He's like, no, I love this. I am committed to this, and I will make it right. And it's not right. But that means the earthiness is not sinful, right? He can enter in this. Anyways, that's a longer conversation, but it's super beautiful. And then you even get to Jesus, and the significance of touch for Jesus is huge and really important, and healing. And what is that? So we could keep going in all kinds of directions, but.
Well, I'll let you go, Kelly. Let me, for the YouTube audience, here is the book again, You're Only Human. I'm going to try to read it backwards here. How Your Limits Reflects God's Design of Why That's Good News. Just came out this last year, 2022. You have a remarkable, your endorsements, man, are from John Swinton to Michael Horton, Beth Felker-Jones, Karen Swallow-Pryor, David Tripp, Scott Sauls, and many others. I mean, I'm excited to dig in. So, Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate your work.
Thank you, friend. I appreciate it.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.
Hey friends, have you been blessed or encouraged or challenged by Theology in the Raw? If so, would you consider joining Theology in the Raw's Patreon community? For as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to a diverse group of Jesus followers who are committed to thinking deeply, loving widely, and having curious conversations with thoughtful people. We have several membership tiers where you can receive premium content. For instance, silver level supporters get to ask and vote on the questions for our monthly Patreon-only podcast. They also get to see like written drafts of various projects and books I'm working on, and there's other perks for that tier. Gold level supporters get all of this and access to monthly Zoom chats where we basically blow the doors open on any topic they want to discuss. All of my patrons play a vital role in nurturing the mission of Theology in the Raw. And for me, just personally, interacting with my Patreon supporters has become one of the hidden blessings in this podcast ministry. So you can check out all of the info at patreon.com/Theology in the Raw. That's patreon.com/Theology in the Raw.